The Xantari had never known fear, not in their long history of conquering stars, charting galaxies, and mastering technologies that bent the fabric of reality itself. They were an advanced civilization, proud of their intellectual prowess, their unshakable belief that no challenge was beyond their reach. But now, as they stared at their dying sun, fear clutched at their hearts. The star at the center of the Xantari home system was unstable, expanding rapidly and threatening to go supernova. It had been deteriorating for centuries, but the end had come swiftly, faster than they could have predicted. The Xantari had tried everything, recalibrating their planetary shields, erecting enormous energy siphons to draw away the star's excess energy, and even deploying probes to monitor the cosmic collapse. Yet, despite their best efforts, they had only delayed the inevitable. The sun was dying, and no technology, no matter how sophisticated, could prevent its explosion. The Xantari leadership gathered in the Grand Council Hall, a vast chamber filled with holographic projections of their doomed star. The room was filled with silence, only the occasional hum of the advanced machinery that surrounded them. Their brightest minds, their most skilled engineers, sat in hushed despair, their faces drawn and hollow. They had failed. There was no way to escape the inevitable destruction. What if we could siphon all the remaining energy and redirect it into a containment field? One of the Xantari scientists suggested, his voice trembling with the desperation that had replaced their once certain confidence. Another scientist shook his head. Impossible. The energy output is beyond our control. The sun is too volatile. If we try anything now, we risk everything. The council leader, a tall, imposing figure named Sholar, stood before the group, his eyes fixed on the projections of the star's violent eruptions. There has to be a way. We've controlled the forces of nature before. There has to be something we've missed. His voice was firm, but even he could sense the weakness in it. The truth was undeniable. They were out of ideas, out of time, and out of hope. Hours passed, and the discussions grew more frantic, but no solutions were found. Sholar's thoughts wandered as he stared at the holographic image of the star. They had always been the superior race. No one had ever dared challenge them. Yet here they were, helpless before a cosmic force they could not control. They had conquered worlds, brought whole civilizations into their fold, but in the end, it was the universe itself that would prove to be their conqueror. The distress signal had been sent in a final attempt to save them, a broadcast to the stars, an invitation to any race capable of offering assistance. But deep down, Schiller knew that no one could possibly have the power to stop the inevitable. They had come to accept that. All they could do was wait for the end. And so, as the council hall fell into quiet, every mind turned to one thought. Was this the end of the Xantari? A faint beep from the command console broke the silence. It was a message. The transmission crackled to life, and a voice, unfamiliar and distant, filled the room. The Xantari leaned forward, their hearts momentarily lifted, a flicker of hope igniting. We received your distress signal. We may have a solution. We're on our way. The message was brief, but the words sent a ripple of surprise through the room. Sholar's eyes narrowed as he considered the message. Could this be their salvation, or was it just another false hope? Whoever had sent the message, it seemed humanity, an unknown species from a distant star, had decided they would try. But as Sholar gazed at the flickering message, one thought consumed him. What could such an inexperienced race offer? The Xantari had always been the ones to solve problems, not beg for help. Would they truly find a way to survive, or had their civilization reached its final moment? Captain Naomi Shaw stood on the bridge of the Endeavor, gazing out at the black void of space. Her fingers hovered above the console, scanning through a series of routine reports from her crew. They were far from home, a small exploratory vessel deep in uncharted space, far from the bustling hub of human civilization. The crew, a diverse mix of scientists, engineers, and explorers, were tasked with mapping unknown sectors and collecting data on distant stars and planets. When the distress signal first came through, Naona thought it was just another anomaly, an error maybe even a test broadcast from an unknown source. But then the message began to repeat, a near-perfect signal that cut through the static of deep space with a clarity that could only mean one thing. This was no accident. This was a call for help. She leaned forward, her fingers now typing commands into the console. The message was coming from an alien civilization, the Xantari. A highly advanced species, according to the data, though Naomi knew little about them. She'd heard whispers about their technologies and conquests in the more distant sectors, but their culture remained a mystery. What was certain, however, was the message they were sending. It was one of pure desperation. Their son was dying, and they were asking for help, any help. Naomi's first instinct was skepticism. The galaxy was filled with races that were far more advanced than humanity, but many of them were also secretive, sometimes hostile. Why would the Xantari reach out to humans, a relatively young species? What could they possibly expect from them? She read the message again, her eyes narrowing. "We may have a solution," it said. "We're on our way." The wording was vague, but the meaning was clear. They needed help, and they were turning to humanity for it. "Captain, you should see this," Lieutenant Ryan's voice called out from the rear of the bridge. Naomi turned to see her chief engineer standing over a screen, his expression tight with concern. He gestured for her to approach. Naomi walked over to Ryan, squinting at the data. "What is it?" "The signal. It's not just a distress call. We're picking up more data in the background. It's like they're guiding us." He paused, eyes scanning the readings. "This isn't an ordinary SOS, Captain. They've been expecting us." Naomi's heart skipped a beat. They've been expecting them. Her mind raced. "Are you telling me that they know we're coming?" She leaned in, analyzing the readouts herself. The Xantari were far away, light years distant, but their message seemed carefully timed, as if they knew a human ship would eventually intercept it. Ryan nodded. "It's like they had already anticipated that we'd be the ones to respond. It's strange. Too specific." Naomi turned toward the view screen, her mind whirling. The Xantari were on the edge of annihilation, but why would they have reached out to humans in particular? The Endeavor was no military vessel, it was a scientific exploration ship. She was not even sure if they could help, but the one thing Naomi knew for certain was this: they could not ignore this call. Her decision was swift, fueled by a mix of curiosity and a deep sense of duty. She knew humanity's history. When faced with the impossible, humans never backed down. They pushed the boundaries of what was known. They overcame unimaginable odds. Naomi's crew was small, but they were capable. She turned to the crew assembled on the bridge. "Set a course for the Xantari system," she ordered. "We're going to answer their call. Prepare for potential contact." There were murmurs of disbelief, even fear, from her officers. But Naomi's voice cut through the tension. "We faced challenges before. We'll face this one too. Whatever it is, we don't turn away." As the Endeavor shifted into motion, heading toward the distant star system, Naomi's thoughts lingered on the message. The Xantari were out of time. But for the first time in a long while, Naomi wondered, could humanity truly be the answer to their crisis? Was it possible that the fate of a whole alien civilization now rested on the shoulders of a small human crew who had no idea what they were walking into? The Endeavor drifted into the orbit of the Xantari system, and the crew fell silent as the enormity of the situation began to settle in. Outside the viewports, the star, once a radiant beacon of energy, now throbbed with an eerie instability. It was a chaotic, pulsing ball of destruction, its outer layers slowly unraveling. Massive solar flares erupted from its surface, sending arcs of fire and radiation out into space. The star was in its death throes, and every second seemed to bring it closer to its violent conclusion. On the bridge, Captain Naomi Shaw stood still, her gaze fixed on the tumultuous star. She could feel the weight of her decision pressing down on her. What if they couldn't help? What if they were just too late? "Captain, we're receiving a direct transmission from the Xantari." Ryan's voice broke through her thoughts. "They've opened a communication channel. They're ready to speak." Naomi took a deep breath, knowing the conversation ahead would be crucial. Put it through. A moment later, the holographic image of a Xantari leader appeared in the center of the bridge. The alien was tall and regal-looking, with elongated limbs and an angular face framed by translucent, shimmering skin. His eyes were sharp and intelligent, though they held a deep weariness. The Xantari leader's name, as introduced by his species, was Sholar. His expression was tense, filled with both hope and dread. Captain Naomi Shaw of the human vessel Endeavor. Sholar's voice was calm but strained. We are grateful for your arrival, though we did not expect your people to respond to our plea. We have little time. Naomi's heart clenched at the weight of his words. We're here to help, she said, her voice steady despite the situation. We received your distress signal and have come to see how we can assist, but I need to know everything. What exactly happened to your star? Sholar's gaze flickered to the massive star visible through the viewport and then back to Naomi. Our sun has been decaying for centuries, but it is accelerating now. We attempted to reverse the process using our technology, but our efforts have only made things worse. The star's core is collapsing, and soon it will reach critical mass and explode. There is no more time for solutions. Our systems are failing, and the energy buildup is too great for our people to withstand. Naomi absorbed his words, her mind already calculating potential courses of action. Is there any way to stabilize the star or redirect the energy? Sholar's expression darkened. We've tried everything, every solution we could imagine. The science is beyond our understanding now. What you see, he gestured toward the star, is not merely a dying sun. It is a force of destruction that will consume all. We are helpless. The Xantari leader's admission of helplessness sent a shiver through Naomi. The idea that even a species as advanced as the Xantari could be overwhelmed by this event made her realize the scale of the challenge before them. She wasn't just dealing with a crisis, she was facing a cosmic catastrophe, something no one had ever survived. We might be able to do something, Naomi said slowly, considering the magnitude of her next words. We've faced situations where the impossible became possible, but I need access to your systems, your technology, everything you can provide. Sholar's eyes narrowed, then he hesitated, as if weighing the consequences of trusting humans with their most precious technology. After a long pause, he nodded. We have nothing left to lose. You may have access to everything. The council room was silent for a moment as Naomi processed his words. She turned to her crew. We'll begin immediately. The sooner we start, the better our chances. As the transmission ended, Naomi felt the weight of what was at stake. This wasn't just a scientific challenge. It was an existential one. The Xantari were counting on them, and Naomi knew that if they failed, the consequences would be catastrophic. The thought lingered in the back of her mind. What if humanity wasn't ready for something this big? But there was no turning back now. With a final glance at the unstable star, Naomi gave her orders. Let's get to work. We don't have much time. Naomi stood at the center of the Xantari control room, surrounded by a mix of human and alien technology. The room hummed with the sound of active data streams, while screens projected real-time analysis of the dying star. It was unlike anything the human crew had ever encountered. The complexity of the Xantari systems was staggering, but the human spirit was a force that refused to be intimidated. I've never seen anything like this before, Lieutenant Ryan muttered, his fingers flying across a console as he examined the star's instability. The sheer energy output, it's not just a stellar death. This is a cosmic anomaly. Naomi stepped up beside him, her eyes scanning the data. They'd only just arrived, and already the clock was ticking faster than they could keep up with. The sun was burning out of control, its unstable core emitting violent bursts of radiation. A catastrophe of this scale would wipe out every planet in the system, and possibly much more. We can't approach this like any other problem, Naomi said, her voice calm but decisive. We're going to need a solution that combines both Xantari and human ingenuity, something beyond the bounds of conventional physics. Ryan glanced at her. You're talking about something radical, aren't you? Naomi nodded. We don't have the luxury of playing it safe. The Xantari have their technology, but it's failing them. and we can't keep thinking small. If we're going to make this work, we have to take risks." Across the room, Shalar and his team of Centauri scientists watched them, an air of skepticism hanging in the air. The alien race had pride in their technological prowess, and they had already admitted that their attempts to stabilize the star had failed. Yet they were now relying on the human crew, whose technology was nowhere near as advanced. "What are you proposing, Captain?" Schiller's voice was cautious, but Naomi could sense the flicker of hope beneath it. "We need to redirect the energy," Naomi said, her mind working quickly. "You've tried to siphon the star's energy, but that's only delayed the inevitable. We need to stop thinking about containment. Instead, we should think about harnessing it." Schuller looked perplexed. "Harness a dying star? It's impossible. The energy is far beyond anything we can control." Naomi walked toward a console, her fingers moving with practiced precision as she pulled up an image of the star's unstable core. "What if we could use the star's energy output in a way that actually stabilizes it?" she asked, voice steady. "Instead of trying to keep it contained, we can build an energy conduit, a system that would redirect the dying energy into a controlled burst." The Xantari scientists exchanged uncertain glances, and Naomi could tell they were struggling to process her suggestion. This was no small feat, no simple technological upgrade. Redirecting the raw power of a dying sun was something they had only ever theorized about. Yet Naomi wasn't finished. "We need to create an energy field that draws the power from the core," she continued, turning to Ryan. "We'll use the excess energy to build a shockwave that will act as a release valve. If we can channel it just right, it will stabilize the star without allowing the supernova to happen." Ryan blinked at the complexity of the plan. "It's risky," he said. "We'll need to design an energy conduit capable of handling the power of a dying star. Even with Xantari tech, it's still pushing the boundaries of what's possible." Naomi's eyes burned with determination. "We've got one shot at this, and it's going to require everything we've got. We can do this. The human spirit doesn't quit." Turning to Shalar, she added, "We'll need access to everything you have. Your energy grids, your star manipulation systems. It's going to take all of it, but if we pull this off, it could save your people." Shalar studied her with cautious eyes, then gave a reluctant nod. "You may have no choice but to succeed, Captain. If we do nothing, the system will be gone. All of it." Naomi felt the weight of his words, but she didn't let it break her resolve. It was no longer just about humanity. It was about saving an entire civilization from annihilation. With her crew and the Xantari scientists now united in a shared purpose, Naomi felt a surge of hope. For the first time since they had arrived, there was something tangible to grasp onto. The clock was ticking, and there was no time for hesitation. "Let's get started," Naomi said, her voice steady. "We're going to save your son." The control room was filled with the hum of activity as human and Centauri engineers worked side by side, their minds focused on the monumental task ahead. Naomi stood at the center of the room, watching as her crew and their alien counterparts worked furiously to prepare the system for the impossible, redirecting the energy of a dying star to stabilize it before it erupted into a supernova. The weight of the task was immense, but Naomi's resolve was unwavering. She had come to realize something over the past few hours. Humanity wasn't just here by chance. They were the key to saving the Xantari. Ryan, his brow furrowed in concentration, was hunched over a console that linked their systems to the Xantari's advanced energy grids. His fingers flew across the interface as he tweaked calculations and adjusted settings. "Captain, I've linked the energy grid to our power conduits, but the calculations keep coming out exponentially higher than we anticipated. If we go over this threshold, the energy buildup could breach the containment fields and cause a massive feedback loop." Naomi's heart skipped a beat, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Can we adjust the containment systems to handle that level of power?" Ryan shook his head. "Even with the Xantari tech, we're talking about the core of an entire star. It's not just a matter of containment. We need to find a way to channel that energy in a controlled manner, or we're all dead." Naomi paced, her mind working through the details. The Gantari had built some of the most advanced energy systems in the galaxy, but their attempts to stabilize the sun had only exacerbated the situation. This wasn't just about stopping a supernova. It was about redirecting the raw energy of the star and using it to trigger a feedback loop that would reverse the collapse. "There's one other option," Naomi said, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "We'll use a multi-phase energy relay. We'll build a conduit that channels the star's power to an interlocking set of energy nodes around its core. These nodes will synchronize and form an artificial core around the dying star, halting its collapse and forcing it to reset." Scheller's voice interrupted her as he approached. "And how do you plan to create an artificial core?" "The Xantari have tried to synthesize new energy structures before, but the force of the dying sun is too chaotic for such precision." Naomi met his gaze, her eyes resolute. "We can't do it exactly like you did before. This time, we're not containing the energy. We're using it. By introducing a harmonic resonance with a synchronized burst of energy, we'll trigger a controlled reaction. We'll create an artificial fusion event, something that rebalances the star." Ryan looked at her, his expression torn between awe and skepticism. "If this doesn't work, the entire system will collapse. We'll be caught in the shockwave." "I know," Naomi said quietly. "But if we don't try, the entire system will collapse anyway. We don't have a choice." The room fell into a tense silence as Naomi's crew and the Xantari worked in unison, pushing their technology to its limits. The human crew contributed their knowledge of adaptive energy manipulation, an area where humanity had excelled in recent years. The Xantari, in turn, provided their advanced fusion systems, star-harnessing technologies that were far beyond human capabilities. Together, they formed a working plan, an uneasy alliance of hope and desperation. The final step of the plan was the most delicate, deploying the energy nodes directly into the star's volatile core. These nodes would act as relays, amplifying the energy from the star itself and transforming it into a series of controlled bursts that would reset the core's energy flow, hopefully stabilizing it long enough for the Xantari to develop a more permanent solution. Naomi stood at the center of it all, her gaze fixed on the star visible through the viewport. It was pulsing violently, each flare sending shockwaves through the system. Time was running out. "Captain," Ryan called out, his voice filled with tension. "We're ready. All systems are in place." Naomi nodded. "Execute the plan." Ryan hit the final command, and the energy nodes began to power up, sending synchronized pulses of energy toward the dying star. The entire system seemed to hold its breath as the nodes made contact with the core, their energy amplifying the star's own power. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the star shifted. A shockwave rippled out from its core, and for a heartbeat, everything went still. Naomi's heart pounded in her chest as she watched, hoping, praying that the plan was working. The energy nodes hummed louder, their pulses synchronizing with the star's dying rhythms. Slowly, the violent instability of the star began to calm. The flares diminished, and the star's chaotic energy started to stabilize. It wasn't perfect. The star was still dying, but it wasn't collapsing anymore. Naomi exhaled, her body tense with relief. "It's working," she whispered. But as she looked out at the star, she knew this was only the first step. The battle was far from over. For a few precious moments, the crew of the Endeavor dared to believe that they had done it, that they had averted the worst. The once chaotic pulses of energy emanating from the star had stabilized into a more controlled rhythm. The massive flares had subsided, and the once violent sun was now simmering with a calmness that had eluded it for centuries. It was still dying, but it no longer seemed on the verge of eruption. The feedback loop they had initiated had worked. However, the relief was fleeting. "Captain," Ryan's voice trembled slightly as he checked his readings. "The energy balance is unstable. We've stopped the supernova, but the core is still in the process of resetting. We're in a delicate equilibrium. If the energy spikes too much or if the system starts to destabilize, it could push the sun back to where we started or worse." Naomi's chest tightened as she processed his words. They had bought the Xantari time, perhaps enough to build a more permanent solution. But their intervention, though successful, had only been a temporary fix. The star's core was still fragile. It was only a matter of time before the energy burst required to reset the star completely pushed it too far. She turned to Sholar, who stood beside her, watching the status updates on the console with a quiet intensity. "What can you do now?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. Sholar's eyes were filled with both gratitude and concern. "We must reinforce the core's stabilizing mechanisms," he replied. "But our current technology is not designed for this kind of repair. We will need time, more time than we have." Naomi nodded, feeling the weight of his words pressing down on her. The Xantari had bought them time, but time was quickly running out. There was no room for error. If they couldn't find a solution, the star would collapse and everything, human and Xantari alike, would be caught in the explosion. "Do we have a way to transfer additional energy to the core?" Naomi asked, scanning the data feeds. "Anything to give the stabilizers more power while we work on a long-term fix." One of the Xantari engineers spoke up, his voice filled with urgency. "We have a backup reactor. It's capable of producing additional energy, but it is not designed for this scale. Using it might delay the process, but it will risk overloading our systems." Naomi clenched her fists. They were at the mercy of their own success. The energy surge they had triggered was still stabilizing, and it was now a matter of playing a dangerous game of balance. If they pushed too hard, they might reignite the collapse. If they didn't act quickly enough, the sun would begin to disintegrate again. "How long until we reach a critical threshold?" Naomi asked. "At current rates," Ryan said, "a few hours at best. The energy reserves we've siphoned off should hold, but without a permanent solution in place, the star could destabilize again. We can't keep this up indefinitely." Naomi turned to face the view of the star once more, her heart pounding in her chest. The calm, steady glow it now emitted was fragile, like a delicate thread holding back an impending disaster. She thought back to the message Shalar had sent, the desperate plea for help. It wasn't just about saving the Xantari anymore, it was about preserving everything they had. "All right," Naomi said, her voice firm. "We don't have the luxury of time. We're going to have to push forward and accelerate the stabilization process. Get the backup reactor online, and I want every system optimized for energy flow. We'll keep feeding the core until it stabilizes completely." The crew sprang into action, working with a focused urgency as Naomi watched them work. The Xantari were doing everything they could with their remaining resources, but the solution had to be found quickly. Every minute mattered. Yet, in the back of her mind, Naomi knew that the cost of saving the Xantari star might come at an unimaginable price. Every system pushed to its limits, every burst of energy siphoned into the unstable core might be the last chance they had to avert total destruction. The balance was razor thin, and if they failed, the consequences would be catastrophic. "We have to succeed," she muttered under her breath, her gaze fixed on the shimmering star. "For all of us." As the Endeavor continued to work frantically to reinforce the fragile stability of the star, Naomi couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the true cost of their salvation might yet come to light. The price of defying the laws of nature was always steep, and no one knew that better than humanity. Hours had passed since Naomi had ordered the Endeavor crew to push forward, reinforcing the star's delicate stabilization. The backup reactor was online, feeding energy into the core, and the systems were humming with intensity. Every member of the crew worked without rest, pushing themselves and their equipment to the limit. The Xantari engineers were exhausted, but there was no room for hesitation. They all knew that without a more permanent solution, their efforts would soon be for nothing. Naomi stood at the front of the bridge, staring at the shimmering star through the viewport. It seemed calmer now, its violent flares reduced to mere pulses, though its energy was still unstable. The star's surface shimmered with a strange aura, an energy that radiated not only from its core, but from the very fabric of space around it. The ship's sensors could barely keep up with the fluctuations. "Captain, we're reaching critical levels," Ryan said from his station. Energy flows are becoming unpredictable. If we increase the power surge by even a fraction more, we could cause the core to implode. Naomi felt a chill run down her spine as she absorbed the gravity of his words. They had pushed the system to its absolute limits. The star's energy had been redirected, but the balance was fragile. If they went too far, they could reignite the supernova, or worse, cause a catastrophic chain reaction that would consume the entire system. Chevalier appeared beside her, his expression grim. We are nearing the end of what our technology can handle. If we cannot stabilize it now, all will be lost. I don't know what more we can do. Naomi clenched her jaw, refusing to give in to the overwhelming weight of the situation. She had known this was coming. There was no way they could keep the star in this state indefinitely. The energy they were channeling from the backup reactor was the last of their resources, and without a new plan, there would be nothing left to try. Are we close? Naomi asked, turning to Ryan. Do we have any chance of getting a permanent fix? Ryan glanced over the calculations again, his face pale. We're close, but the margin for error is getting narrower by the second. The energy spikes are too erratic. The core it's starting to destabilize again. Naomi's thoughts raced. They needed more time, just a little more. We can't afford to fail, she muttered, her voice barely audible. What if we reroute the energy flow through the auxiliary conduits? Could we use those to buffer the fluctuations? Ryan hesitated. It's a risky maneuver, Captain. The conduits aren't designed for this much power. It could fry the entire system. I don't care, Naomi said firmly. We do it now. Ryan's fingers danced across the console, working quickly to implement Naomi's desperate plan. The Xantari engineers worked in tandem, adjusting their systems to support the rerouting. Naomi's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the screens fill with fluctuating data, the numbers spiking erratically as the energy coursed through the ship's systems. Suddenly, an alarm blared. Energy levels spiking. Ryan shouted. It's too much. The conduits can't handle it. The star outside the viewport seemed to pulse again, this time more violently. A shockwave of energy shot outward, hitting the Endeavor and sending the ship lurching. The lights flickered, and the crew struggled to hold on to their stations as the ship rocked violently. Naomi could feel the tremor in the hull, a reminder of the catastrophic power they were trying to tame. Captain, Schiller's voice was filled with desperation. It's collapsing again. The stabilization is failing. Naomi's mind raced. They were moments away from losing everything. She turned to her crew, her gaze meeting Ryan's. Give me everything you've got. Overload the system if you have to, she commanded. Ryan looked at her, his eyes wide with the realization of what she was asking. Captain, if we overload the system. There won't be a ship to save if we don't. Naomi cut him off. Make it happen. Ryan didn't hesitate. He slammed his hand on the console, and the ship's systems went into overdrive. The auxiliary conduits surged with power, sending a concentrated stream of energy into the star's core. The ship shook violently, and the screens flickered with corrupted data. In that moment, Naomi's heart was in her throat. She could see it, the star, its core pulsing violently as the energy poured into it. The once dying sun was now fighting back with a fury she had never seen before. Then, it happened. A massive explosion of light erupted from the star's core. The entire system seemed to tremble as the shockwave hit. Naomi's crew braced themselves as the ship was rocked by the force of it. But then, as quickly as it had come, the light began to fade. The pulse stabilized. Naomi's breath caught in her chest. They had done it. The star, for now, was safe. But the cost was clear. The Endeavor had pushed its limits, just as humanity had always done. And Naomi knew that the repercussions of their actions would echo through the galaxy. The Endeavor drifted in the silence of space, its engines humming faintly as the crew took in the aftermath of their near-catastrophic intervention. Outside the viewport, the star pulsed quietly now, its violent eruptions no longer threatening the system. It was stable, at least for the moment, but stability was fragile, and Naomi knew better than anyone that they had merely delayed the inevitable. Captain, the energy feedback is holding steady. Ryan reported from his station, his voice sounding both relieved and exhausted. The core is still unstable, but it's no longer on the verge of exploding. We've bought the Xantari some time. Naomi nodded, her eyes never leaving the star. It was hard to believe they had succeeded. Against all odds, they had managed to stop the supernova, saving not just the Xantari homeworld, but an entire system. Yet, as much as she wanted to feel victorious, there was a part of her that couldn't shake the knowledge that this was only a temporary reprieve. The sun's dying process had been slowed, not stopped. Shuttlear entered the bridge, his expression weary but grateful. His people had been given a second chance, yet Naomi could see the weight of their predicament in his eyes. The Xantari civilization had been spared for now, but the clock was ticking and they still faced an uncertain future. "You've done the impossible, Captain Naomi," Shaler said quietly, his voice heavy with emotion. "You've saved us. We will forever be in your debt." Naomi turned to him, her gaze calm but resolute. "We didn't just save you," she replied. "We saved everyone. But the real work begins now. You need to find a way to stabilize the star permanently before it destroys your entire system." Shuttlear nodded. "We will do everything in our power. Your actions have given us hope, Captain. I cannot express how deeply grateful we are." Naomi didn't respond right away. Instead, she allowed herself a moment to reflect on what they had accomplished and what they had lost. The human crew had given everything. Some of them had risked their lives, pushing the ship and its systems to their absolute limits. They had made the impossible happen. But in the back of her mind, Naomi knew that this victory was bittersweet. She walked over to the viewport and gazed at the star once more. The system was still reeling from the energy that had been siphoned off, and the crew of the Endeavour was far from unscathed. The strain had been immense. The risk of failure had loomed over them at every turn. Even now, Naomi felt the exhaustion gnawing at her bones, the quiet acknowledgement that they had cheated death for the time being, but only just. "Captain," Ryan said, interrupting her thoughts, "we've also sustained significant damage. The auxiliary conduits took a beating, and the backup reactor is at its limit. We need to make repairs, or we won't be able to get far." Naomi turned back to him, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Noted, Lieutenant. First, we need to make sure the Xantari have everything they need to keep the star stable. Then we can address our own issues." With a deep breath, she turned to Shuttlear. "We'll stay as long as we can to assist, but your people need to take the reins now. You've been given a chance to rebuild, but it's going to take everything you have to ensure the survival of your system." Shuttlear nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "We will not squander this chance, Captain. We will fight to preserve our future, just as you did for us." Naomi felt a flicker of pride in her chest. She had always believed in the human spirit, the resilience that drove people to do the impossible when the odds were stacked against them. Now she had seen it in action, not just in herself and her crew, but in the Xantari as well. As the Endeavour slowly turned away from the star, Naomi stood at the helm, watching the now stable sun fade into the distance. There was still much to do, repairs to make, systems to reinforce, and lessons to be learned. But for now, they had achieved what many had thought was impossible. And that, Naomi knew, was the greatest victory of all.